Hello friends, welcome back and let us continue with our topic on general physiology. In the previous session we have discussed about the cell membrane and how the cell membrane helps us to determine the movement of the substance across the membrane. We have also discussed about the distribution of the ions or molecules across the cell membrane in ICF as well as in ECF. In this session we will be discussing about the transport process across the cell membrane, which we commonly call as transport across cell membrane. To begin with transport across cell membrane, the first and the foremost thing everybody should remember is the distribution of the substances across the cell membrane, because then and then only we will be able to understand which substance is going to move on which side of the membrane and under which category are we going to put that movement of the substance. So before going ahead, let us revise the distribution of the substance across the cell membrane. We have two compartments, an ICF and an ECF. ICF is the intracellular fluid, the inside the cell, and outside, that is ECF, is extracellular fluid, the substance which are more outside the cell. The substance which are written over here, they are in more concentration on that compartment of the cell membrane. So in the ICF, that is inside the cell, we have more of potassium, magnesium, hydrogen ion and carbon dioxide. Whereas in the ECF side, we have more of sodium, calcium, chlorine, glucose, bicarbonate and oxygen. Knowing this, we will be able to understand that how the transport process occurs and how the transport process is classified. Okay, so let us go ahead now. The transport across membrane is broadly classified in two categories. One is known as a passive transport, whereas the other one is known as active transport. Both of them share some very typical features, a passive transport and an active transport. What do you mean by passive transport? Whenever a substance is moving from higher concentration to lower concentration, that transport process is called as passive transport. Whereas an active transport is a transport where the substance is moving from lower concentration to higher concentration. So I'll repeat once again: passive transport and active transport. Passive transport, the substance are moving from higher concentration to lower concentration, whereas active transport, the substances are moving from lower concentration to higher concentration. How does this occur? Passive transport does not require energy, so no energy is required for passive transport. Energy in terms of, you can say, an ATP or in terms of potential energy. So passive transport does not require any sort of energy to move the substance. The substance just diffuse from higher concentration to lower concentration. Whereas in active transport, the substance, they actually move from lower to higher, and because they move from lower to higher, that is against the concentration gradient, they do require energy in one or the other form. So they do require energy. So energy is utilized or energy is used in active transport. Let us have one look at the distribution of the substance what we have mentioned here. Suppose, let us talk about sodium. Now suppose if sodium is going to move. So sodium, if the sodium is moving from outside to inside, let us just give an example here. Sodium is moving from outside to inside. So if sodium is moving from outside to inside, that is from ECF to ICF, it is going from higher concentration to lower concentration. It is moving from higher concentration to lower concentration. This movement of sodium can be called as a passive transport or a diffusion. Whereas potassium, if potassium is moving from inside to outside, then this can be termed as passive transport. Sodium is moving from outside to inside, whereas potassium is moving from inside to outside. This movement is occurring from higher concentration to lower concentration, that is along the concentration gradient. So this distribution gives a very beautiful idea that which movement of which substance is termed as passive transport. Sodium movement from outside to inside is a passive transport. Potassium movement from inside to outside is a passive transport. Calcium moving from outside to inside is a passive. Chlorine moving from outside to inside is passive. Magnesium moving from inside to outside will be an active. Glucose moving from outside to inside would be a passive, whereas oxygen moving from outside to inside will be a passive, and CO2 moving from inside to outside will be a passive. So this is a passive transport where the substances are moving from higher concentration to lower concentration. What would be calling as an active transport here? Let us go with the same example. Now suppose if sodium is transported from ICF to ECF. If sodium is transported from ICF to ECF, that would be a active transport. That would be a active transport from ICF to ECF. If sodium is transported from ICF to ECF, that will be a active transport, because here the sodium is moving from lower concentration to higher concentration. Similarly, for potassium, if potassium is transported from ECF to ICF, from ECF to ICF, that is from lower to higher concentration, then potassium will be an active transport. So in active transport, the substance move against the gradient, that is lower to higher concentration. Doing this, let us study each transport process in detail. Let us study each transport process in detail. First of all, passive transport. Now, a passive transport comprises of three important features. Let us first note those three important features. Number one, a passive transport always occurs from higher concentration to lower concentration. Higher concentration to lower concentration. The substance always moves from higher concentration to lower concentration. Second feature, the passive transport does not require energy. So no energy is used in passive transport process. No energy is used. Energy is not utilized in passive transport. Number three, passive transport. Which type of movement or which type of transportation will you call as passive transport? There are certain action words which you should be remembering. If you come across these action words, then definitely these are passive transport. Say for example, channels. If you come across this word, sodium channel or a potassium channel or a calcium channel, then it's a passive transport. Or you come across a word pore, aquaporins. In the cell membrane there are aquaporins, then it's a passive transport. If you come across the word facilitated, if you come across the word facilitated diffusion or facilitated movement, then it's a passive transport. You also come across a word like the substance is moving through the cell membrane. Through the cell membrane, then also this would be a passive transport. So channels, pores, facilitated diffusion or through the cell membrane, all these terms can be accompanied in passive transport. This movement of passive transport is broadly classified in further two subtypes. They are, number one is simple diffusion, and number two is facilitated diffusion. Simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Remember, What is a simple diffusion? The substance simply moves across the cell membrane by using channels, pores, or they move through the lipid bilayer. The substance are moving on their own. Nobody is carrying the substance from outside to inside or from inside to outside. Facilitated diffusion is more commonly for the substance which does not move on their own, which are being carried by a transport protein either from outside to inside or from inside to outside. Remember, simple diffusion is generally for small ions or molecules, whereas facilitated diffusion is for large molecules for which transport proteins are available. Okay, so in the further we will be discussing each of these transport process in more detail. Remember the features of passive transport once again. These features are shared by both of them, that is simple diffusion as well as facilitated diffusion. Substances are moving from higher concentration to lower concentration. They does not use any sort of energy for the movement, and channels, pores, or moving to lipid bilayer or facilitated movement can be one of the action words for passive transport. So let us go with simple diffusion first. What is simple diffusion?